The she did not go quietly. That is what the blood tells us. And a former FBI profiler who has spent decades reading crime scenes just confirmed what many investigators already suspected. Nancy Guthrie stood her ground at her own front door. She fought back, and the person who took her made mistakes. Big ones. A wrist tattoo caught on camera, an identifiable backpack, light-colored clothing worn in the middle of the night. These are not the moves of a careful, calculating criminal. These are the moves of someone who did not think they would get caught. And according to Jim Clemente, a man who built his entire career hunting people exactly like this, that is precisely why this case is closer to being solved than most people realize. Today, we break down the blood spatter evidence that rewrites everything we thought we knew about Nancy's abduction, the profiler's chilling portrait of who took her, and the forensic technology the FBI is quietly using right now that has solved cases that sat cold for decades. Stage booth. This week, TMZ sat down with retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente for one of the most detailed and revealing interviews this case has produced. And what he shared changes the way we understand almost everything that happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home that night. The blood tells a different story. From the very beginning of this case, there has been speculation about how Nancy was removed from her home. Was she carried out? Was she taken in a blanket? Were multiple people involved in physically moving her? Jim Clemente looked at the blood spatter evidence and gave a clear answer. No. The blood found at the scene tells investigators that Nancy was at her front door when the attack happened. She was struck in the face. The impact caused her to cough up blood, and that blood landed close to the ground, consistent with someone who was bent forward or falling rather than standing upright. The pattern and location of that blood rules out the possibility that she was wrapped in a blanket and carried. It also rules out multiple offenders being physically present at that specific moment of the attack. What this means is profound. Nancy Guthrie did not simply open the door and disappear. She stood there. She resisted. She fought back against someone who had come to her home in the middle of the night to take her. At 84 years old, she fought back. The mistakes that will cost the perpetrator everything. Jim Clemente was direct in his assessment of whoever did this. This is not a sophisticated criminal, and the evidence backs that up completely. First, the clothing. The perpetrator arrived at Nancy's home wearing light-colored clothing, at night, during a kidnapping. Any experienced criminal knows that dark clothing is basic tradecraft when you are trying to avoid detection. Light colors reflect light. Light colors get caught on camera. This was a fundamental, avoidable mistake. Second, the backpack. The perpetrator was captured on doorbell camera footage carrying a backpack that investigators believe may be identifiable. A specific style, a specific brand, a specific detail that could be traced. An experienced criminal would have used something generic and disposable. This person did not. Third, and this is the detail that could break the entire case open, a wrist tattoo. The doorbell camera footage captured what appears to be a tattoo on the perpetrator's wrist. Tattoos are unique. Tattoos are traceable. Tattoos are the kind of identifying detail that forensic investigators and genetic genealogists can use to narrow down a suspect pool dramatically once they have a DNA profile to work with. 3 mistakes. Any one of them alone might not be enough, but together, the clothing, the backpack, the tattoo, they paint the picture of someone who planned this crime but did not plan for the consequences of being seen. Now here is where this interview delivers its most unexpected revelation. Jim Clemente does not believe this was a stranger. He does not believe someone randomly selected Nancy Guthrie as a target. His theory, built on years of profiling violent offenders, is that the perpetrator had a prior interaction with Nancy, or with her daughter Savannah, and that interaction may have seemed completely innocent at the time. Think about the people who pass through a person's life without being remembered. The Uber driver who picks you up from the airport, the repair technician who comes to fix the air conditioning, the delivery driver who drops packages at the door. the handyman who spends an afternoon at the house. Any one of these interactions could have given someone access to information about Nancy's routine, where she lived, that she lived alone, that she was elderly, that she was the mother of a famous television personality with resources.
Clemente's point is this. The perpetrator did not stumble upon Nancy Guthrie. They knew enough about her to target her specifically. And that knowledge most likely came from a moment of contact that Nancy herself would never have thought twice about. This theory narrows the suspect pool considerably. Investigators will be looking at service records, rideshare logs, delivery histories, anyone who had legitimate access to Nancy's world in the months before her abduction. Let's step back and think carefully about what Jim Clemente's profile is really telling us. The portrait he is painting is of someone driven by desperation rather than expertise. A sophisticated kidnapper plans for every contingency. The clothing, the camera angles, the getaway, the communication. What we see here is someone who had a plan, but not the discipline to execute it cleanly. Light-colored clothes, an identifiable bag, a visible tattoo. These are the details that experienced criminals obsess over eliminating before they ever approach a scene. But the prior contact theory is the most psychological revealing element of all. It tells us this person was not operating purely on impulse. They watched, they observed, they identified a vulnerability and decided to exploit it. That combination, impulsive execution of a carefully chosen target, is one of the most dangerous criminal profiles because it means the person is motivated enough to plan, but not experienced enough to disappear cleanly afterward.
And that is ultimately why Clemente believes this case will be solved. Not because the perpetrator is brilliant, but because they are not. Every mistake they made at that scene is a thread, and investigators are pulling every single one of those threads right now. The use of forensic genetic genealogy by the FBI adds another dimension entirely. This is the same technology that identified the Golden State Killer after decades of failure. It works by taking DNA from a crime scene, building a genetic profile, and then cross-referencing that profile against public genealogy databases to identify relatives of the suspect, even distant ones. From there, investigators can work their way down the family tree until they land on the individual who matches. It has solved cases that seemed completely unsolvable. And if that hair evidence from Nancy's home yields a usable DNA profile, this technology could identify the perpetrator even if they have never been arrested or fingerprinted in their life. I want to hear from you today. Jim Clemente has told us the perpetrator made 3 critical mistakes: the light-colored clothing, the identifiable backpack, and the wrist tattoo. And he believes the FBI's forensic genetic genealogy technology will ultimately identify this person.
My question for you is this. Which of these 3 mistakes do you think will be the one that finally catches the perpetrator? The tattoo, the backpack, or the DNA? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and your thinking genuinely shapes the direction of the show. I want to be honest with you about how this interview made me feel. When Jim Clemente described Nancy standing at her front door, being struck in the face, fighting back, it stopped me completely. This is an 84-year-old woman, and in the most terrifying moment of her life, she did not surrender. She stood her ground. That tells you everything about who Nancy Guthrie is. And what strikes me about Clemente's profile of the perpetrator is how ordinary it makes them sound. Not a mastermind, not a ghost. Someone who wore the wrong clothes. Someone who brought a recognizable bag. Someone whose tattoo was caught on camera. Someone who probably had a perfectly unremarkable interaction with Nancy or Savannah at some point and filed it away.
Here is what I need you to watch for in the coming days. The FBI now has hair evidence at Quantico being processed with advanced forensic technology. Forensic genetic genealogy is believed to be actively in play. The tattoo detail is in the hands of investigators, and the 90-day milestone arrives this Friday, May 1st, a date that will bring enormous pressure on every agency involved in this investigation. Jim Clemente believes the perpetrator's mistakes will be their undoing, The question is not if they will be identified, the question is when. And when that moment comes, when a name is attached to that masked figure on the doorbell camera, this channel will be the first place you hear about it. Make sure you are subscribed. Make sure your notifications are on, because this case is moving, and we are moving with it. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 86 days. She fought back at that door, and this channel will keep fighting for her until there are answers. Stay aware, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.